Um, and at about that same time, in actually the same lab that the transistor was made, these three guys were working on it. It was 1954, so the development of the transistor was continuing, but it was again starting to infiltrate culture and business. And the guy on the far left is Gerald Pearson, who actually shared an office with Walter Brattain, who was one of the inventors of the transistor. And Pearson, with the guy on the right, Cal Fuller, were working on something called a silicon solar rectifier. I'm sorry, a silicon power rectifier, excuse me. Pearson was an experimental physicist. Fuller was a chemist. And what Fuller would do was he would make these pieces of silicon in his lab that were diffused, and he would put these light layers of slightly impure, slightly doped, we call it now. They didn't call it that at the time. They called it N or P silicon on these silicon wafers, and he would bring it to Pearson, and they would try and work out this device they were making for the phone system. What Pearson started to realize was that this stuff that Fuller was making was incredibly photosensitive, not just surprisingly so, but it had a larger effect than anything Pearson could find in the science literature and anything he had ever seen before. And that struck him. What also struck him was he knew a guy in the middle from college named Darrell Chapin. Now, all these guys actually worked in different buildings, and they just kind of serendipitously almost found each other. And what Pearson knew about Chapin was that Chapin was actually looking for a way to solve a problem that he was working on at Bell Labs that had to do with those old repeater stations I was talking about. They were spaced, again, every 50 to 100 miles around the country, and they amplified phone calls. In some rural areas, these repeater stations didn't have a real reliable power source. Especially in the South, they use dry cell batteries that would sometimes stop working, or they use diesel generators. And what Pearson realized, thinking that he had been having lunch with Chapin and knew what he was trying to work on, was that this thing he and Fuller were also working on too could possibly be used as a power source for this problem. So the three men, went to work on this, and eventually they came out with what was called the Bell Solar Battery, or the Silicon Solar Cell. And it was tried in 1955 at Americus, Georgia, and it was very successful. I'll talk about the economics of it in a second, but in terms of its function, it worked very well. And in fact, it's interesting too, because I live in New Jersey, and these are going up on every phone pole now too, except they're a lot thinner, and obviously the efficiencies are much higher.